A revolutionary. Say whoa. Trap revolutionary. Got the wave of too scary. Doing this thing like Malcolm ain't by any means necessary. We ain't got it by no one seen hand. We got the master plan. Get the move.
Go on, y'all. Y'all want to make this video real quick, man. Think about, the judge denied Karmelo's motion for new trial. Judge Michael Chitty or whatever. Man, like, I don't know, man. Just frustrating, man. Like, I think what I know, the system, the so-called criminal justice system, from being locked up in jail to going through, trial proceedings, to, being actually, going through the court process, court proceedings, and then being convicted and then, sent to prison. It's all a process, and really to keep the system afloat. The system is so big to where it actually stays afloat for black bodies. It's because you have to think, man. People are okay. People will, There's things going to happen in society, right? Some people have, and rightfully so, have to be punished for certain things. But think about this in this sense. Is society going to be to where, they really want no crime, nothing to happen at all, and the fact that it's pretty much to where, they from school to prison pipeline, so many, tests has been done, on third graders, right? To see who's going to end up in the criminal justice system. These are the young black men, young black boys, young black, people, that they, run these tests on, that they are counting on to go to prison, because, and that they're going to put in prison. That has to be understood. It's a certain outcome that they want to accomplish, that they have to keep the prison system afloat. Because the thing is, if you don't have people going to prison, it's a lot of people gonna be out of jobs. That's just what it is. And that's not going, from the system, the way the system is set up, they, that's something they're not willing to allow to happen. In the fact that, through the 13th Amendment, they have, in Texas especially, they have, they have continued on with slavery. It's a modern day form of slavery, because like I said, the 13th Amendment allows for involuntary servitude for the punishment of a crime. So you can, you get punished for a crime, you're working for free in Texas, for sure in Texas. I know that for a fact. Texas has continued on with the slaveholding ways. And matter of fact, in the 90s, 1992, 1993, it was a prison explosion, to where they built probably 100 or so prisons, man, like within about maybe a 2-year period, or I would say maybe a 2 to 5 year period. Texas incarcerates a lot of people, that is, it's unfortunate, man, and I believe, no, I'm saying I believe, but Karmelo got caught up in the process. So I just hate that happen, man. You know what I'm saying? And then, like I said, that's one of the reasons we don't get the justice we need. State prison population 130,000 to 135,000 inmates, and then 75,000 under parole supervision. So you might as well say about 200,000 people are in the just you know, under some form of supervision. Just put it like that, in the prison or outside prison. You know, so the system, you know, that's the way the system stays afloat. You know, whether it's just, you know, it's getting a conviction. That's one of the things, you know, people push hard for convictions. You know, this just what it is. You know what I'm saying? Because you have to think about it. If the prosecution was on the side of law and justice, they wouldn't even been pushing for Karmelo to get that much time or to get punished for what he did. Looking at the whole facts and circumstance of the case, you know, and the fact that they came out there and they knew that Austin was a troubled kid. You know, he was a troubled kid, and he'd been just pretty much, you know, just how can I say it? Given a tap on the wrist or you know, just a light punishment for the things he was doing, but what he was doing was escalating. You know what I'm saying? So Austin or his brother was going to escalate into somebody being harmed, them harming somebody where they would get locked up, or somebody, you know, which in this case they end up getting locked up. Karmelo ended up getting locked up for harming them, you know, harming, you know, one of the brothers. You know, so that's actually what it was pointing to. You know, that, you know, has not been said, but that's how it really goes. You know, somebody, they just, it escalates. You know, you go from doing little petty stuff to something big. You know, or you end up, somebody does something to you to where, you know, you'll end up harmed to where it's you know, cost you your life or whatever it may be, you know, some type of tragic, you know, situation, circumstance, you know. So that's what it ended up happening, you know what I'm saying? And with Hunter and Austin, you know, it was just leading up to them just doing, you know, certain petty things to where their offenses was basically going to an escalated level. You know, so, you know, I hate to say it, man, when you see that type of activity, when people are doing certain things, you know, as juveniles, and the conduct is going towards a certain, you know, actually a certain small level, it's going to a big level, you know, where they're going to end up really doing something bad. You know, or like I said, some, you know, they do something bad to somebody, or somebody ends up doing something to them, you know, because they're trying to do something to somebody else that may harm them. You see what I'm saying? So, you know, I think that's what it was, man. He just got so many chances, so many, you know, and then overlooking and, being, you know, treated, given, you know, a, you know, treatment like, or I would say just, you know, being partial towards, you know, him, you know, as a, you know, a white kid, you know, in society that most of the time the court system seems, you know, they say they seem redeemable, you know, not gonna give them, you know, like a grave charge or some form of, you know, serious punishment, you know, because they want to, you know, that particular way of certain kids, because of the color of skin, we have to be real about it. They're giving that deference. They're giving that, you know, leniency, that partial treatment, you know, because they are considered redeemable. You know, they're considered, oh, he's just, you know, he's just young right now. He's just, you know, going through adolescence, you know, teenage mistakes, you know, but not really identifying that the crimes or the incidents of escalating, you know, that's known within, you know, juvenile juvenile culture, or, you know, the culture of criminal punishment, you know, for juveniles, you know, that it just ends up happening like that. You know, so, you know, so it's basically phases of escalation, you know, what, you know, basically that what's going on with Hunter and Austin, you know. So that man just end up, you know, I just think it's unfortunate, you know what I'm saying? I would say, like I said, that, you know, he needed more help than he got. I would say that, you know. So uh, yeah, you know, and yeah, you know, they call it like it's a number thing, you know, behavioral development pathways, you know what I'm saying? So they've identified it, you say behavioral development pathways, and it's criminologist, notably Rolf Loeber, you know, he classified the escalation youth conduct into three distinct developmental pathways. One is authority conflict pathway, which says begins at like age 12 and they, you know, escalates and, you know, from early stubborn behavior to like running away. Then you say covert pathway begins with minor covert behaviors, frequent lying, shoplifting, you know, then escalates to property damage, vandalism, fire setting, you know, progress to moderate to serious delinquency, fraud, burglary, grand theft, and then overt pathway begins the minor aggression, you know, like bullying, annoying others. It's kind of like Austin and you know, his brother, you know, Hunter. Then it escalates to physical fighting, gang fights, physical assault, and progresses to severe violence, robbery, aggravated assault, sexual battery. You know what I'm saying? So you know, it's just kind of, I said it was escalated behavior, you know, that they were engaging in, man, and it just, you know, it wasn't corrected. You know, I would say from that perspective, you know what I'm saying? I would say, man, I hate that happened with them. They're troubled kids. That's just what it was. They were trouble, and it's probably due to the split between the mother and father. You know what I'm saying? I know some people are saying, man, you know, F it, you know, he good for him or whatever, you know what I'm saying? But we try to have to explain it in a way that people understand the mindset, you know, because some people may not look at it like that. They thinking like, oh, you know, bad kid, you know, they were mess ups, hard heads, and this and that and the other. But I would just go on to say like I'm pretty sure like it was escalated behavior from frustration, you know, having to stay with the mother, where the father not really being there or whatever, or, you know, that split and them having to come up without a father. That's the best way I put it, you know. But the father was like seeing like he was tripping. He off, you know, kind of off, you know, off his rocker a little bit with the racist rant he did, you know, after the whole incident happened, you know what I'm saying? So stuff like that, man, I think, you know, kids go through things like that. And that's probably what it was. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, they like, we taking our frustration out on everybody. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for them. It's unfortunate for a lot of kids in that same situation. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, this whole incident just end up, you know, like I said, occurring. It's certain, you know, just things, man, that children go through. And I think that they end up, you know, being, you know, just involved in that type of behavior because of what they were going through. Taking their anger and their frustration out on their, you know, I think it was how you call it, familial, you know, familial type of family, you know, issues, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it's just unfortunate, you know what I'm saying? Unfortunate for that situation, did him lose his life, for unfortunate for Karmelo, the shit had to do the prison time. Then that's the bad thing about it. Like, I think I think his appeal gonna be granted eventually, but he gonna have to do some time. But he gonna be in prison for a little bit, you know. And that's another thing I think also the reason they strive for a conviction. It's like, nah, we think he guilty instead of like, hey man, let's look at the facts of what happened. We think he guilty and he need to go to prison, and that's basically what they wanted, you know. And they got what they wanted, you know. Instead of trying to look at everything like, man, you know, hey, this situation escalated to where it shouldn't have, and you know, Austin and his brother Hunter were the aggressors, you know, and Karmelo was really trying to protect himself. Should he have, you know, stabbed him or whatever? Okay, probably not. No, probably not. But at the same time, you know, him trying to protect himself any way he could, so he wouldn't get a beat down. Hey, can you fault him for that? You know what I'm saying? Because you know, you just know, like two brothers, they riding together. Shit, you ain't gonna let your brother fight somebody and you not jump in? Nah, no. That ain't gonna happen. You know, and especially, you know, like I said, they known for beating up on folk. So shoot, you know, you have to look at it like that, man. You know, and another thing, that's what, you know, and we know how the system is, you know what I'm saying? Had the roles been reversed, you know what I'm saying? Black kid jumping on a white boy, he stabbed a black child. Yeah, it wasn't no building. That's just what it is. You know what I'm saying? They like looked at everything they could to not charge the young white kid with a crime. You know, so and that's another fact of it. You know, that's another aspect of it. You know, it's like, man, you know, the way the system is, it's like, you know, it's unfair treatment for black people. And it's the same thing with Northern Wales. You know, it's a pattern. You know what I'm saying? That's another reason why people are frustrated as well. It's a pattern that's going on with our people. You know, the treatment, the unfair treatment, the biased treatment. You know, and that's when somebody dies or somebody's incarcerated. You know what I'm saying? So, and I even said that with Karmelo's situation. There's so many other young black men, you know, who have you know, been convicted or pleaded guilty or railroaded in some fashion, you know, and given prison time. You know, they may have been in similar situations as Karmelo, but they got time or didn't have the attorneys, or, you know, they case didn't have that attention to where they got the help they needed, you know, and they were railroaded or pled guilty for a crime they may not have committed, you know, or you know, may not had to do it, but they just went ahead and pleaded so that, you know, they don't get more time, you know, where, you know, they don't have a chance to you know, get through the situation, you know, because that's another thing, you know, these court-appointed attorneys, and then sometimes paid attorneys, they'll tell you to plead out, you know, so you don't face more time or possibly, you know, getting more time from going to trial, you know. So, you know, just the whole system, man, is, yeah, it's a biased system. And that's the best way I can put it. It's a biased system, man. And you know, I really hate that for Karmelo. But I would say I do think he would get, because I made a video the other day saying I think he was going to get a new trial. You know, at this point, you know, because this is literally at the trial level, filing an appeal, because, you know, you're entitled to file in your court. You are entitled to file for an appeal, you know, in that court. And that's why they had the judge remove Judge Jones Rolf Jr. Like, hey, he can't be fair no way. He's saying that the jury got it right on an interview on national TV, you know, that they got it right. So basically he was biased as a judge. You're not supposed to be biased, making those statements like that, or even having any basically leanings toward his guilt or innocence, right? So, you know, that's one of the reasons he was moved. But Judge Michael Chitty didn't, you know, like I said, didn't rule against him, because judges don't usually overturn other judges. You know, it's kind of like the good old boy system that just don't happen. You know, so it would end up being a higher appellate court, if anything, that would overturn it. But I would say this, man, Karmelo, regardless of what happened, he gonna be good. You know, I don't think he's gonna, you know, do that whole sentence. But he's gonna have to do some time. I think before he gets parole, it's gonna probably be 2 to 4 years, man, before he not parole, but gets a new hearing. You know, and then speaking of parole, even if he, you know, I don't think he's gonna do that much time. But if he just say he ends up having to do the sentence, you know what I'm saying, 35 years, he had to do half of that and come up for parole. He'll still be in his 30s. You know what I'm saying? He can still get out in his 30s, man. You know what I'm saying? If that's, God forbid that, but if that happens, you know what I'm saying, he still will be okay. You know, get his education down there, or whatever he has to do, man. Just stay out the way. You know, don't get in no type of activity. You know, any you know, foolishness down there, and he'll be all right. He'll be okay. You know, do the time and you know, get up out of there. Y'all don't see him, you know, having to do the full sentence or having to come up with parole or anything like that. I think he will be granted another appeal, and then you know, he can, you know, yeah, he can come home, and he can, you know, do what he needs to do. You know, they'll possibly get time served, because he could possibly like come up for a new trial, have a new trial. Then, if he's safe, for instance, they reduce the charges, you know, from murder to involuntary manslaughter, whatever. You know, then I believe, you know, involuntary manslaughter carries 2 to 10. 2 to 10. So he could actually end up getting time served. You know what I'm saying? So that could end up happening. You know, so, you know, on the Texas law, it carries 2 to 20 years. So he could possibly, you know, get a situation like that. But anyway, I think he's gonna come out of it, man. I think he's gonna get an appeal. It just didn't happen on the trial level. Filing in the trial court and appeal. Getting a new trial in his trial court. Due to the constitutional violations and other things that occurred. Discrepancies that occurred. During his trial. But I believe he's gonna eventually, be granted a new trial and then possibly come out of that situation on top. So I would say that. But anyway, let me get up out. I just want to get on here and say that. You know what I'm saying? I hope y'all out there doing well, living life full of love and happiness, doing great. Striving greatness every day. I appreciate y'all liking, sharing, coming on videos. I said, we can agree or we can disagree. We disagree, we can hash it out. Ask y'all be respectful toward me, I'm be respectful towards y'all. But to next y'all, appreciate y'all. Love y'all. All right, y'all.
Fuck it, go ahead and blow off the dough. Step through the maze, man, and became amazing. About to rewrite history and change a page in a crooked book that never told us the true story. Like how we were kings and queens before the slave story, before the killing, stealing, and drug dealing on some real shit. We ran the world.